Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I'm just sitting here drinking my morning coffee, getting ready to eat breakfast, do my squats. And yes, I got a hook grip on this 2 pound coffee cup, making those grip gains. Alright, today I just want to cover some basic terminology with you guys because there's some confusion. Like in my own training, when I bring this stuff up, there's some confusion there. When I say something like something is an accessory exercise, people suddenly jump up and say, oh, you're going to quit doing it. That means it's optional. All sorts of nonsense. And so, since a lot of this topic has come up lately with me discussing some of the stuff from Jeff Cavalier, the topic of accessories, everything else, there's again a lot of confusion as to what these different terms mean. And people need to understand the difference between primary exercises, assistance exercises, and accessory exercises. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, I'm a bodybuilder, so that doesn't matter to me. Well, it does, because for bodybuilding, your posing is your primary exercise. That's what you do in competition. Everything else is accessory, meaning every single exercise that the competitive bodybuilder does is an accessory exercise if all they compete in is bodybuilding. But again, very, very few people are actual really bodybuilders. The vast majority of people out there watching on YouTube Fitness are not bodybuilders. They don't compete in bodybuilding. A lot of these guys will say, well, I train for hypertrophy. Well, if you're training for hypertrophy, then you train for strength and training volume, basically. That's all that really means. You're not a competitive anything if you don't compete. But I would still recommend for those people that they take these things into consideration, because this stuff can affect the way that your training flows and your different exercises. It still matters to you, although it's obviously more important for people who compete in some sort of sport, particularly a strength sport. Now, when we talk about a primary exercise, what does that mean? That's your competitive lifts. It means if you are a power lifter, it's the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, the way that you perform them in competition. In other words, for you, if you compete sumo on the deadlift, the conventional deadlift is not a primary exercise for you, right? Just what you compete in. Weightlifting, it's the snatch, the clean, and the jerk. Strength lifting, it's going to be the squat, the press, and the conventional deadlift. So that's what we mean by a primary exercise. Now, conversely, if you don't compete, a primary exercise is an exercise that you plan on doing heavy singles with, maxing out, or probably going anywhere above 90% of your 1 rep max at any point in your training. In other words, if you use any sort of max effort training system anywhere in your training to where you are hitting anything that heavy, then a primary exercise are the exercises that you plan on doing that with some degree of regularity, either for a test of strength, a show of strength still, or something that an exercise that you personally feel the need to get really strong at for very low reps. It's a primary concern for you. So that's what we mean by that. So for someone else, the weighted chin up could be a primary exercise if it's something that you want to eventually get really good at doing a single rep on, right? That would be your primary exercises. Now, when we talk about assistance exercises, what does that mean? It means something that's a very close variation that uses a similar bar path, and you're using that usually to either get some additional volume, address a weak point, things like that. Now, for a lot of guys who compete, say, equip, that's going to include shorter range of motion lifts. And actually, like most West Side barbell training, for example, those guys, their max effort exercises are actually assistance exercises, but they still train them to what we would call detrained maxes. So let me give you guys some further examples there. On the squat, an assistance exercise, depending upon what you do, could be a box squat, but I'm going to say for most people, if you're a raw lifter, a box squat really actually isn't an assistance exercise, because it's a completely different movement pattern. The bar moves to a completely different path. Maybe a front squat could be an assistance exercise. A pin squat, where you squat and then press from a pin's trying to maintain a certain bar path. Say a pause squat is an assistance exercise. For something like the bench press, the floor press, a board press, a press with a cambered bar so you can increase range of motion, presses on board so you can shorten the range of motion, maybe benching with bands or chains, whatever. Those would fall into assistance work. Why? Because you are doing the same basic bar path, the same movement pattern, but you're either doing something to change the strength curve, You are changing the range of motion longer or shorter in some way. But I want to reiterate that raw lifters in any sport have no business reducing their range of motion. It is not going to help you particularly. Leave that for the equipped guys, but lengthening the range of motion, say a bench press with a cambered bar. All right, that's an example. So then deadlift. How about deficit deadlifts? How about deadlift variations? Pause deadlifts. Again, block rack pulls below the knee. Now, anything else, if people need to remember, you start shortening the deadlift. For a raw lifter, it is not an assistance movement because it usually changes the bar path completely. It changes everything, and it doesn't carry over very well. So it falls more into, again, equipped guys. So those are examples right there. And anything else can count. Let's say the chin up. The chin up becomes your a primary exercise. Well, a pull up could be like an overhand grip pull up or a hammer grip pull up could be an assistance exercise. What we're basically counting an assistance exercise is something in which you have a very, very similar movement pattern, ideally the same bar path. And in some cases, assistance exercises there just to make a certain part of the bar path harder or to teach you to find your groove, such as like a lot of pin work is there specifically to help you find leverages to find the most efficient bar path on an exercise. Now, accessory movements are general hypertrophy movements. Any accessory movement is something that is a completely different movement pattern from your primary lift that you are using with some sort of training volume, because you don't plan on maxing on it, in order to build muscle mass. And it's usually to build muscle mass in places that are your weak links on your primary exercise. For example, most successful power lifters do a lot of upper back work. That's a perfect example, right? Using exercises that have nothing to do with their competitive lifts. Because if you do nothing but squat, bench, and deadlift, you will develop muscle imbalances. Those three exercises are not enough to fully develop your entire body. You can develop muscle imbalances as a result that might limit your strength on those lifts, and in some cases can have a higher rate of injury because you don't create enough stability in your shoulder girdle and lats and everything else that you might get hurt on the bench press eventually because your rear delts are weak, your lats are weak, things like that. So you don't have stability there. So perfect examples, stuff like I do, a lot of rowing. A lot of rowing is really high on the list. Now there are legitimately world-class level power lifters, for example, who just squat, bench, and deadlift, who either do a lot of pull-ups or a lot of rows, and oftentimes they do large amounts of them. Again, similar to what a bodybuilder would do in terms of volume, although they might go really low reps, they might do high reps. Overhead pressing, the strict standing press, could be considered an accessory exercise. Why? People say, what's a press? Shouldn't it count towards the other? No, because you are using a completely different movement pattern. And it builds muscles at a different ratio. It is absolutely an accessory lift for the others unless you compete in it, and then it becomes a primary movement. Any of your non-chest presses become that way, even an incline bench, because it is a different bar path. It's quite a bit different bar path, an incline bench, any sort of dumbbell press, a weighted dip. Those are all accessories that build the primary movers on, say, a bench press, but they're still an accessory, whereas in all your rows, pull-ups, all of that stuff is accessories also, but they build muscles on the other end of it. But it all falls under accessory work. So any exercise that you do specifically for the purpose of bringing up lagging muscle groups so that you can create either strength, stability, muscle balance to reduce injury rates, all of that falls under accessory work. And everybody does some type of accessory work. Everyone does some type of accessory work because no sport does your primary exercises fully develop you. In other words, you're going to have lagging muscle groups, and that's what people need to understand. Muscle balance itself can be critical in some cases for developing maximum strength on big exercises, but it also tremendously affects your stability and injury rates on these other exercises. So at the very least, even power lifters do a ton of upper back work, upper and middle back work, separate from their big three. Where we get into debates, of course, is things like assistance work. I don't think anyone thinks accessory work, even for strength athletes, is a bad thing. Where the arguments come into is how useful assistance work is and whether everyone needs it. And a lot of people do tons of assistance work, but there are also champions who don't really do much, if any. who are massive, they're strong. So again, people need to understand these three terms that we're talking about is your primary movements, your assistance exercises for those primary movements, and then accessory work, which includes all of your other hypertrophy work there to create muscle balance. And the middle one is again the one that's most controversial is actual assistance work of how useful it is. And with a lot of people comes to is the accessory movements they're doing, are they picking ones that are going to actually help what they're trying to do more, or are they doing it just for general accessory movements? We get into a lot of debates there. But no matter what direction you go with that, it is important when you're thinking through your training programming and you're picking exercises for your selection that you understand where every exercise is in that continuum that you do and which of those three categories it's in and understand why you're doing it. I'm never a fan of people just doing random exercises. You need to have a purpose behind everything that you do. There needs to be a reason why you select that exercise, and that needs to be thought through in your training when you're picking what you're doing. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.